Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to You Are Wrong. We've been a little bit late with this week's episode. We had to reschedule due to various interferences, but at least we managed to create a much more stable connection to Chris. Hey Chris, how is it going? I can see you're somewhere else in the world right now. Where are you hanging out?
Yo, what's up? I'm here, this beautiful place. Vietnam, #1 always. Safest place to be during these really trying times.
Interesting. What's going on there?
As you can see, I'm safer in traffic than I am wherever you're at, buddy. Just telling the truth. These are just facts. This is knowledge. Truth, yo.
Well, good to hear that you're safe and that you're taking care of whatever situation you're looking into. So, as we've been late a little bit, let's get right into this week's episode as we're going to discuss how this crisis is actually impacting the music world. It's springtime and half the world has been locked in quarantine for weeks, while most of my social circle seems rather gleeful about the prospect of staying inside all day, playing Xbox, sacrificing to the Great Moloch, or plundering their liquor cabinet. It's becoming clear that the thin veneer of stability capitalism promised to provide humanity is crumbling. Jobs are lost, income is spare, and toilet paper has become a rare luxury. The world is changing rapidly, and none remains unaffected. In this brittle situation, it's all too transparent that those traditionally underfunded, living off meager loans and dependent on tight social structures to make a living, find themselves at wit's end. Artists generally tend to prefer romanticized lifestyles of month-to-month paychecks, while venues, record stores, and small labels depend on daily revenues and tightly planned schedules. All of that is now mostly gone. As usual, the role of the cultural commentator is to inquire how the crisis has not only affected the music business, but also how the scene adapts to this unfortunate turn of events. I actually started out trying to compartmentalize this episode, but due to the interlinked nature of subject, art form, and business life within the music industry, I just decided to wing it. There you go. So this might end up a little chaotic. Sorry. So let's start with those most affected by this crisis, the artists. Being a musician means to surrender one's life to a repetitive cycle of grinding. As romantic as stories of writing, performing, and traveling are, there's the very repetitive reality of driving on highways, having bad food, being barely paid for performing in front of medium-sized crowds, maybe hanging out after a show and sleeping in bad hotels, only to get up early in the morning for more driving and stress to occur. Back home, the writing and recording process is often overseen by label executives and managers. Egos are big and disagreements flare up. Being a musician is stressful because it most of all means to create an artistic output that will provide for enough audience response to warrant investments. That's the way both for big name labels and small independent freelancers. If what you produce doesn't attract enough attention to sufficiently pay for your lifestyle, you're on a dead end, and that's hard to navigate out of without giving up your dream. Thus, you'll find most musicians slaving away at day jobs. The lucky ones find something close to their passion, such as working bars, DJing, or filling in as stagehands. The unlucky ones have to cope with the depressing reality of office life. So, waking up to the impact the crisis has had, we see unemployment numbers skyrocketing. And with no real end in sight, questions arise how many will manage to make a sufficient income that further carries their artistic ventures. Ironically, those who see their mental health affected the most by the crisis seem to be big rock and pop stars. And I'm not talking of Jamiroquai's shoewear here. Without naming and shaming anyone, Twitter and Instagram have become garishly shocking showcases on specific artists being confronted with, to them, unbearable circumstances, affecting the anxious cult songwriters as much as peak of the pyramid pop stars. And social media is ready to broadcast their spiraling out of control. I don't really want to dwell on this as I'm not interested in any kind of tear-jerking or schadenfreude, but it is notable that in an environment characterized by stark commercial pressure, we see people break under pressure no matter their net worth. When your job becomes synonymous with your lifestyle and you find yourself judged upon the very norms created by the cheering masses and whispering company executives alike, the dissolution of social spheres combined with a sudden implosion of capital, it's easy to be overwhelmed and go a little nuts. Luckily, many artists face the atmosphere of impending uncertainty in creative ways that also seem to be means to overcome the sudden implosion of their routine. For example, Laura Marling has taken to Instagram to teach followers how to play pretty much her entire catalog on guitar. It doubles as intimate experience, watching her perform these songs in her living room, and didactic exercise, actually learning to play guitar and her songs. And hey, what better time to take up learning an instrument than during a government-induced social downtime? It also allows her a window to communicate with fans, which is especially interesting as Marling has been rather reclusive in the past, at least in comparison to many of her contemporaries who use social media. Speaking of contemporaries, embattled songwriter Ryan Adams, who saw himself pretty much being cancelled after a row of scandals last year, has seen a social media influx of attention since the start of the crisis, with many performing his songs on their profiles. This in turn led Adams to perform acoustic covers of popular songs requested by users, concentrating on first responders or those recuperating from the illness, re-establishing a dialogue with the fan base which seemed to have largely abandoned him due to the fallout of his antics. Speaking of antics, adolescent gamer favorites Scooter are one of many acts who have taken to the social media sphere to broadcast an entire concert with no audience. It's one of the most surreal things I have ever seen, watching HP churn out his exhilarating shouts with no further crowd reaction, but also oddly charming. No matter where you stand on the band, it's weirdly reassuring to see them go through the motions of what usually is a large-scale event for a bunch of people on their computer monitors just to brighten their day, fully aware of the limitation thereof. It also saw many of my personal friends who don't listen to Scooter at all sharing the concert as a sort of novelty. But really, it only reflects positively on the band that they're willing to do something so odd and pull it off with charm. Speaking of limitations, one of the most notable movements that built during the crisis is United We Stream, an emerging movement started by club spaces that broadcasts individual DJs going through their sets. While this isn't replicating the complex machinations of urban club experiences, it democratizes a process often limited from the outset, transporting the musical side of electronica and techno into somebody's bedroom. And while it's unlikely to generate income for the DJs, it raises awareness for many club spaces already struggling before the crisis set in, leading to donations, merchandise sales, and further support once the crisis is over. This is most interesting to me, actually, as the electronic club scene has always struggled with inclusivity, wrestling with scandals, microaggressions from all sides, and often opposed conservative lifestyle models. Well, except when it doesn't. But United We Stream kind of feels like a resurgence of creativity from within, providing outlets for marginalized DJs to stand alongside heavyweight veterans, as well as lesser-known spaces to present their style and brand. However, let's be clear, while most musicians and performers are likely to get back to their art after the crisis, this entire situation might well mean the end of many established and struggling spaces alike. Concert venues rely on regular income that trickles in via ticket sales, and that doesn't even include side income with something like beverages. While most bands have made it a point that their concerts are only postponed and not cancelled, meaning no loss on the side of the venue, it still completely annihilates the tight scheduling of the next few months, as most labels had to cancel in advance to ensure lack of bankruptcy. Okay, maybe not the largest of the large big-name labels, but established alternative labels who co-sign famous acts depend on that income much more than many realize. Again, not going to name names here, but most people within the business know what a tightrope act of running a label is, even if you're relatively successful. 1 year of diminishing sales and a few flops of big-name artists you sign can ruin the entire venture. Remember what I said before regarding the pressure some artists now face. Worse yet, look at clubs and bars that employ DJs and small staff. Dependent on which country you live in, governments seem to be pretty inconsistent when it comes to help both those spaces and the people being employed by them. While many are lucky, there's ample reports of bureaucratic complications all over the map, which is why so many are now turning to crowdfunding to somehow scrape together the budget necessary for rent and staff to be paid. And all of this doesn't even account for people like live mixers, stagehands, roadies, drivers who are often hired by labels. In my first short video on the crisis, I provided a GoFundMe for roadies, but let's be real, those crowd crowdsourced donations can only benefit a small amount of people in what ultimately is a huge industry that's been widely known for often ignoring the well-being of the individuals it employs. Yet, with this crisis setting in, it's also clear that maybe we should demand a more beneficial system that allows those affected by a sudden implosion of income to have some sort of financial safety net. No? Boy, I wonder how we could call such a thing, or how we could set up such a thing. Oh, sorry, got a little carried away there for a second. Yeah. Anyways, I actually applaud businesses like Bandcamp, who made the pretty drastic decision to award 100% of income during one whole day to the labels and artists selling their product. Sure, it's essentially also a good advertisement for their service, but I saw some pretty vocal support of this online, with sales exploding within that 24-hour period. Quite a few one-man labels I follow saw their merchandise sell out, and Bandcamp's decision to step back from revenues boosted many artists enough to carry on through this crisis a little longer. Yet, it is disheartening to realize that this strategy to actually support small labels and artists isn't being taken up by what are essentially the mega selling platforms. Companies that make millions every day and really could allow for a shortcut to allow those in need to benefit from their gigantic reach. Again, maybe we need something more supportive than the system we got. And then there's the actual impact of the crisis on music and the way it is released. Speaking of her earlier, Ma Ling not only did her live guitar sessions, she also opted to release her new album, Songs for Our Daughter, early to give people something to enjoy while quarantined in at home. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, better known as Nine Inch Nails, went further and actually released 2 concept albums about the situation, Ghosts 5 and 6, titled Together and Locusts, with song titles alluding to the crisis we're in. Together is the quieter, more hopeful release, dedicated to accepting the situation and finding optimism within our ability to persevere and help each other, while Locusts is a grim, paranoid and anxious record, where Together embraces current trends within the ambient sphere, referencing vaporwave as much as YouTube discoveries and favorites such as Hiroshi Yoshimura. Locusts dives head-on into cinematic dark ambient landscapes for a quite nightmarish experience. Both records seem more purposeful and well-rounded than the previous Ghost releases. Maybe because they are deeply affected by the very human experience of being separated. Reznor and Ross had to send material back and forth from quarantine, and this whole crisis is clearly a deeply emotional experience for them. I personally enjoyed Together a little more, with songs like Your Touch harkening back to David Bowie's Low, and with Faith successfully creating a sort of post-human cyberpunk atmosphere. Things I find deeply engaging and in a way also uplifting, but Locust's dark and detailed textures are equally as achieved. I've always been fascinated in artists that make an attempt to turn real-life events into conceptual works of art, and I think releases like Together and Locusts are ultimately as necessary for the composers as they are for the audience. They allow us to find shelter within somebody else's perspective, revealing aspects we are blind to and giving shape to emotions we struggle to communicate. If anything, this quarantine should make us reflect more on the world we inhabit and how we can improve it, be it individually, structurally, or in creating small pieces of art ourselves. Because in that, we still manage to come together and communicate even when we're forced to be apart. Since the recording of this episode, a variety of other occurrences happened, such as, for example, Radiohead providing a variety of recordings of past live shows on their YouTube. And they are not the only one. Various 4AD acts also are providing entire recordings of live shows on the label's YouTube channel. The more time passes, the more it becomes apparent, though, that concert promoters and bookers are actually the ones most affected by this crisis at this point. Record sales seemingly haven't slowed down, at least not so far, while most of the notable experts on the situation are claiming that there won't be any further mass events, in short concerts and festivals, until end of next year. As we face a constantly developing situation, we will continue to provide provide any notable updates that might occur here and there, so keep your eyes peeled. So that's it for this week's episode. But wait, as we had to postpone the last 2 weeks' episodes, we decided to go ahead with an additional record review this week. I don't want to spoil what it is yet, but it's probably a review for the new Strokes record. Oh, now I did it. Yes, it's a review for the new Strokes record. I mean, but honestly, who wouldn't have guessed that themselves? So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode and will join us soon in the upcoming record review. Have a nice evening and stay, as usual, wrong.